Snow drifted in uneven waves across the empty Boston street as the neon diner sign flickered above the glass windows, glowing faintly at 2:17 in the morning, when only ghosts and the sleepless still moved. Inside, the near-silent diner, 3 men in tailored suits hunched over their late-night coffees, while the waitress on duty, Emily Carter, wiped down a counter already clean from habit, not necessity. She was thinking of Noah asleep at home, thinking of overdue bills and the math that never added up when the door to the private booth swung open, and billionaire tech founder Julian Whitmore staggered into view, one hand clawing at his chest. For half a second, no one understood what they were seeing. Then, his knees buckled with a thud, sharp enough to break the quiet, and every head snapped toward him. Julian convulsed once, twice, then went frighteningly still. A man shouted, "Someone, call 911, but none of them moved closer because money and power created strange distance, even in disaster. Emily crossed the floor before she felt herself decide to move, sliding to her knees beside him. His skin was pale, chilled, breath absent, pulse fading into nothing. The world shrank to a tunnel of fluorescent lights and fear as she pressed 2 trembling fingers along his neck and found no rhythm of life. She had seen this before the night her husband died on a factory floor, and she had promised herself she would never freeze again. She looked up once, saw the suits backing away, saw the manager pale with panic, saw a phone recording already pointed at them. For 2 seconds she hesitated, thinking of Noah, of how one wrong choice could take him from her, but doing nothing would be worse. Doing nothing would make her complicit in another death. She lifted Julian's chin, sealed her mouth over his, and breathed life into emptiness, praying she was not too late. The diner went so silent that even the snow outside felt loud. Someone gasped behind her, someone whispered, "She is kissing him," and someone else snapped, "What is she doing? Get her away from him." But Emily blocked out every voice except the count. She spoke low and steady, compressions rising and falling, under her locked arms. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, 30 compressions, 2 breaths. She felt a wrist yank at her elbow, but she shook it off, focusing relentlessly on the fragile weight of his chest, lifting slightly under her breaths. More phones appeared, more eyes widened in judgment, rather than horror, and she felt heat rising along her spine, fury pushing back against fear, as if the whole world disapproved of a poor waitress touching a man too valuable to die. She heard the manager ordering, "Stop this." She heard a woman shriek, "This looks wrong," but Julian's throat spasmed under her hands, and that tiny movement convinced her to continue. She breathed again and again, and on the 4th cycle his body jerked sharply as if pulled upward from dark water. He coughed violently, air rasping back into starving lungs, and Emily nearly collapsed with relief. His eyes fluttered, half-conscious, unfocused but alive. The suits who had refused to help now surged forward, tripping over each other to claim proximity to him, while Emily fell back onto her heels, her arms trembling from effort and fear, and something like disbelief. Before she could stand, 2 security guards rushed in, grabbed her by the arms, and hauled her upward as though she were the threat, and not the reason Julian was breathing. Around her, the room erupted in chaos, voices overlapping, accusations snapping like sparks. Someone hissed, "I told you she crossed a line." Someone else muttered, "Disgusting." And another voice, a low male whisper, slid close enough to sting, "You just ruined your life." Emily froze, the words sinking deeper than any bruise. One of the guards pointed to a phone screen, where a headline already forming glared back in brutal clarity: "Single mom, waitress, kisses billionaire CEO." Her breath hitched at the sight, the entire truth crushed under a single misleading phrase. Sirens wailed outside, growing louder, cutting through the confusion with a cold metallic promise, yet none of that sound reached her fully because her pulse had drowned it out, turning each beat into a warning. Snow kept falling, the diner lights kept buzzing, and the world kept watching while her future quietly cracked open beneath her feet, just as the paramedics burst through the door and everything folded into black. The moment the paramedics knelt beside Julian, the security guards released Emily with a dismissive shove that sent her stumbling against a booth. She steadied herself on the edge of the vinyl seat, chest still heaving from exertion, as the medical team worked swiftly, attaching monitors, lifting Julian onto a stretcher and confirming that he had regained circulation. No one thanked her. No one even looked at her except with suspicion or disdain, as though she were an intruder instead of the only person who had acted. The manager strode toward her, face tight, jaw clenched, ordering her to stay where you are until we sort this out. She whispered, "I saved his life," but the words felt small, drowned beneath the louder narrative already spinning around them. A paramedic paused, glanced at her with a flicker of recognition, then hurried after the stretcher as it rolled toward the waiting ambulance, lights flashing red across the diner windows. Emily tried to follow, but the manager blocked her path, stating, "Corporate will need a full incident report from you." Corporate, a word that in her world meant distance, fear, and consequences. Her hands shook as she wiped them on her apron, still recalling the feel of Julian's chest rising faintly under her palms. She asked, "Can I go home to my son?" But the manager snapped, "You leave when I say you leave," and turned away to answer his ringing phone. Across the diner, two of the suited men whispered while staring at her, their expressions twisted with revulsion. Another customer murmured, "I bet she planned this." Emily felt heat crawl up her neck, shame and anger tangling inside her until she could barely breathe. She backed against the counter, eyes stinging as the ambulance sirens faded into the night, carrying Julian away from the moment their lives had collided. A police officer arrived, asked a few stiff routine questions, and left after learning the paramedics verified CPR. Yet even he looked unsure, as though the presence of a billionaire complicated truth itself. When the manager finally allowed her to clock out, her legs were numb, her thoughts blurred. She stepped into the freezing Boston air, pulling her thin jacket tight around her body. Snow soaked into her shoes as she walked toward the bus stop, each step heavier than the last. Her phone buzzed and she glanced down, expecting a message from Noah's sitter. Instead, she saw notifications exploding across her screen. A video from the diner, already posted, already circulating, already twisting everything into something ugly. Her image bent over Julian's body, cut at the wrong second, stripped of context, framed as scandal. Thousands of strangers would see it long before morning. Emily closed her eyes, a cold dread coiling in her stomach, as she realized the whisper in the diner had not been a threat. It had been a prophecy. Emily barely slept. By the time she unlocked the diner's back door for her mandatory follow-up meeting the next afternoon, her body felt hollow from exhaustion, as though she had poured everything she had into a man whose world would never intersect with hers again. The manager was already waiting inside, not with coffee or concern, but with two people she had never seen before, a woman in a stiff gray suit and a man carrying a leather folder embossed with the logo of the diner's parent corporation. Their expressions told her everything. This was not a conversation. This was an audit of her existence. "Sit," they said, and she obeyed, because people like her learned early that obedience sometimes kept a bad situation from getting worse. The woman introduced herself as Compliance and Liability Counsel, using a tone that made Emily feel smaller than the chair she sat on. "We are conducting a preliminary risk assessment of last night's incident," she said, and Emily felt the word incident scrape across her skin, as if CPR were a crime. The man in the leather folder opened it and slid out a printed screenshot. It was the worst possible frame, the exact millisecond her lips touched Julian's. Taken out of context, it looked intimate, not life-saving. He asked, "Do you understand why this image is problematic?" Emily blinked, stunned. "I was giving rescue breaths." He had no pulse. The counsel interrupted. "Protocol requires waiting for EMS, unless there is imminent danger of death." She said he was in imminent danger. His heart stopped. The manager whispered, "We have customers calling, saying they saw things that made them uncomfortable." Emily stared at him, stunned by how easily strangers' discomfort outweighed a man's life. The counsel continued, "Your actions have created liability for this establishment, especially considering the individual involved." Emily frowned, confused, until the man explained, "The individual is Julian Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Health Systems, one of the richest men in the state. Our insurer has already contacted us." Emily's stomach dropped. She had not even known his name until this moment, and now it appeared his identity alone determined whether her deed was heroic or defamatory. The counsel leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Off the record," she said, "these situations often become contentious. People make claims. Lawsuits happen. Rumors can destroy reputations. We need to protect the brand." Emily felt anger rising under her ribs. "I saved his life. Isn't that good for the brand?" The counsel looked almost offended. "What is good for the brand is irrelevant. What is safe for the brand is our priority." The phrase hit her like a blow. She whispered he was dying, and the manager murmured, "Lower your voice," as though volume could alter truth. The man from corporate folded his hands. "Effective immediately, you are suspended pending legal review." Emily's breath faltered. "Suspended without pay." She asked, "How long will the review take?" but the answer was a shrug that carried centuries of indifference to women like her. The counsel added, "You are not authorized to speak publicly. If media contacts you, you will say no comment or we will pursue breach of contract consequences." "I don't have a contract. I'm hourly." The counsel said, "Everyone is bound by the handbook." Emily pressed her lips together to keep from trembling. The meeting ended and the manager escorted her out the back door, as if she were a liability leaking radioactive fumes. Outside, a black sedan was parked at an angle, the rear door open, a man in a corporate windbreaker speaking briskly into a phone. Emily recognized Whitmore Health Systems on the badge clipped to his belt. Corporate PR. She tried to slip past unnoticed, but he looked up and his gaze sharpened. "You're her," he said, and she froze. Him. Them. Them who? The waitress, the one who performed CPR. The words did not feel appreciative, they felt accusatory. He walked closer, lowering his voice. "Listen carefully. We are doing everything possible to protect Mr. Whitmore's privacy. We cannot have rumors or narratives spiraling." She frowned. "What rumors?" His jaw clenched. "You know exactly which ones. The video, interpretations. People will say what they want. We need to minimize exposure." Emily's brows furrowed. "I didn't do anything wrong. I saved him." But PR man shook his head, pitying her ignorance. "In situations involving billionaires, perception is reality. If people think you crossed a line, then for us you crossed a line." Emily stepped back, stunned. She asked, "Is he all right?" The man paused, caught off guard. "He is stable." That was all he said. No thank you, no acknowledgement, only stable, as though stability appeared magically on its own. He turned away, answering another call, but Emily heard fragments. Controlling optics, avoiding claims, frame as misunderstanding, emphasize gratitude but no contact. She realized they were crafting a narrative where she didn't exist, or worse, existed only as a threat. She walked away from the diner in a daze, her breath fogging in the winter air. At the bus stop, a notification pinged on her phone, then another, then 15 more. Reluctantly, she opened social media. The video had exploded. Millions of views, thousands of comments, none kind. Some wrote "gold digger alert." Others wrote "clout-chasing single mom trying to kiss a billionaire." Others called her words too crude to repeat. News outlets began posting headlines: "Waitress crosses boundary with unconscious CEO." Her hands shook violently, and she nearly dropped the phone. A stranger approached, holding out a coffee cup as if offering comfort, but his tone was mocking. "So you the waitress from the video?" She ignored him, walking faster down the snowy sidewalk, but he followed. "Bet you're famous now. Hope he sues you." Emily turned away quickly, heart pounding as she darted into the bus whose doors had just opened. She sat down, gripping the pole with white knuckles, trying to steady her breath. A teenage girl sitting 2 rows away whispered loudly, "That's her," and lifted her phone to snap a picture. Emily looked away, cheeks burning. She clutched her bag tighter as the bus lurched forward, sliding across icy pavement. Her mind raced through everything she needed to protect Noah from: online harassment, CPS inquiry, losing her job, losing her apartment, losing her son. She pressed her forehead against the cold window, silently begging the world to slow down just long enough for her to breathe. When she finally reached her neighborhood, she hurried through the snow toward her building, hoping no one outside recognized her. But 2 neighbors sitting on the stoop stopped talking when they saw her, one muttering, "So that's the waitress who kissed that rich guy." Emily pushed inside, shaken. Noah greeted her wearing pajamas and holding a half-eaten apple. "Mommy, you're home early. Are you in trouble?" Her throat tightened. She knelt, pulled him into her arms, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "Everything is going to be okay, sweetheart." But as she hugged him, her phone vibrated again, this time with a voicemail from the diner's district manager. His voice was clipped, formal, cold. "We need you to know that pending legal consultation, we may have to consider termination. There's pressure from the insurance side. Please do not speak to media." Emily closed her eyes, sinking onto the couch. She whispered to herself, "I saved his life. Why does it feel like I am the one dying for it?" By the time Emily pushed open the front door of her apartment, the weight of the world seemed to press against her spine, as if gravity itself had doubled overnight, and the hallway lights flickered above her with the same unsteadiness she felt inside. Noah ran toward her barefoot in his dinosaur pajamas, his hair sticking up like he had just woken from a nap even though it was nearly evening. He wrapped his arms around her legs and looked up with wide, hopeful eyes that made her heart splinter. "Mommy, are you in trouble?" he asked, and the innocence in his voice nearly undid her. She forced a smile, brushing his hair back with trembling fingers. "Of course not, sweetheart, everything's fine." But the lie sat on her tongue, heavy as stone. She hung her coat on the wobbly hook by the door and walked into their cramped living room, where bills were stacked on the coffee table like a slow rising tide, threatening to swallow them whole. The sitter, Mrs. Dalton, gave Emily a sympathetic look from the couch, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I saw the news," she said softly. "Honey, I know you didn't do anything wrong, but people talk." Emily nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you for staying with him." Mrs. Dalton squeezed her arm, then left quietly, the door closing with a muted click that sounded more final than it should have. As soon as the apartment fell silent, Noah pulled at Emily's sleeve. "Mommy, why are people saying bad things about you online?" She froze. "You saw that?" He nodded, rubbing his small fingers together anxiously. "Kids at school were watching videos on the bus. They said you kissed a man who was sleeping." Emily's stomach twisted. She dropped to her knees so they were eye level, her hands cradling his cheeks. "I was saving his life, Noah. He couldn't breathe. If someone can't breathe, you help them. That's what we do." He studied her carefully, then whispered, "I believe you, but will they?" She pulled him close, breathing in the smell of apple juice and laundry soap, trying to anchor herself in that tiny moment of his trust. After he wandered off to play with his action figures, she sank onto the sagging couch, scrolling through an endless river of cruel comments. Strangers dissecting her motives, strangers calling her a predator, strangers accusing her of using CPR as an excuse to touch a billionaire. She felt sick. Her phone buzzed with a new email from the school district. The subject line froze her heart. Student welfare concern. The email stated that due to the sudden viral attention and the nature of the allegations, the school's counselor had flagged Noah's home environment for review. Not because of anything Noah had done, but because of her. Another line read, "We may need to notify Child Protective Services." Emily's breath hitched, and for a moment she couldn't inhale. The thought of losing Noah, even for a day, even for an hour, sent a cold electric terror through her veins. She pressed a hand to her forehead, fighting back a rising wave of panic. She had worked so hard to build a stable life for him after losing his father. Every decision, every sacrifice had been for Noah's safety. And in one night, a single misunderstood moment threatened all of it. She jumped when her phone rang again, the number unfamiliar. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Is this Emily Carter?" a clipped female voice asked. "Yes. This is Officer Grant with Boston CPS. We received a preliminary notice from the school. We would like to schedule a home visit within the next 48 hours. Emily gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. "A home visit? Because I saved someone." The officer paused. "Because there is viral content depicting unusual behavior from a caregiver. Until we assess the situation, we cannot make assumptions." Emily tried to find her voice, but her tongue felt thick. "I didn't do anything wrong. I believe you must provide documentation when we arrive." The officer continued speaking, but Emily could barely register the words. She hung up, staring blankly at the peeling paint on the opposite wall, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. Noah approached again, holding his toy car. "Mommy, can we play?" Her eyes burned. "In a minute, baby. I promise." He nodded carefully, sensing something was wrong, and went back to his room. Emily buried her face in her hands, trying to steady her breathing. A notification from her bank popped up, $32 left in her account. Her next paycheck was gone along with the job itself. She stood abruptly, pacing the small space as if movement could fend off fear. She needed to do something, call someone, find a lawyer. Except lawyers cost money she didn't have, and no one in her world had connections to people who handled scandals involving billionaires. She walked to the kitchen where the fridge hummed weakly and opened it, even though she knew what she'd find. A carton of milk, half empty, 2 slices of bread, a handful of grapes close to spoiling. She pressed a hand to her mouth. Noah needed dinner. She'd skipped breakfast and lunch, and was prepared to skip dinner to make sure he ate, but even then the math stayed cruel. She pulled herself together long enough to make him a grilled cheese, and cut it into triangles like he liked, then sat across the table, pretending she was hungry too. He chattered about dinosaurs and school art projects, blissfully unaware of the storm tightening around them. When he finished eating, she tucked him into bed and kissed his forehead, whispering everything will be okay. But once the door closed, she felt her strength break like a thin stick. She returned to the couch and opened her laptop, looking for overnight jobs, but every listing required clean background checks or reputations, unsullied by controversy. She typed waitress jobs in Boston, scrolling through options until her screen blurred, but then clicked on one only to find someone had posted her picture in the comments, calling her a risk. A comment with hundreds of likes read, "Don't hire her, she's the waitress who assaulted that CEO." Emily rubbed her temples, fighting dizziness. Midnight came and went. Her building was noisy, pipes groaning, neighbors yelling, sirens wailing faintly outside, and through all of it she felt like she was shrinking smaller and smaller, until the world could swallow her without noticing. She finally set the laptop aside, curling up on the couch, pulling Noah's old blanket around her shoulders. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, trying not to cry. Her phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. "You're trending on 3 platforms. If you want to get ahead of the narrative, call me." A link followed, pointing to a PR consultant who charged $200 an hour. She deleted it instantly. Another message appeared moments later from a different number. "You should be ashamed." She turned off the phone with shaking hands. Hours later, when she finally drifted into a restless half-sleep, a loud knock jolted her awake. Her heart dropped into her stomach. She tiptoed to the door, peeking through the peephole. 2 reporters stood outside holding cameras, one murmuring, "I think she lives here." Emily stepped back, swallowing panic. She couldn't let them wake Noah. She stayed perfectly still until the footsteps faded down the hall. She returned to the couch, sinking down as exhaustion and terror blended together, wrapping around her like cold water. She whispered to the empty room, "I did the right thing." Why does doing the right thing feel like punishment? As dawn crept across the skyline, lighting the edges of the city, Boston woke with little care for the breaking apart of one woman's life. Emily sat alone in her tiny living room, staring at the door, waiting for another knock, waiting for the next blow, wondering how much more she could survive. Morning light seeped through the thin curtains like a judgment as Emily forced herself out of bed after barely an hour of real sleep. Her head throbbed from crying the night before, her throat dry as though the air itself had been scraping against her. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. Pale eyes, swollen hair, unbrushed, and yet, somehow she managed to tie it back into a neat bun, because even when life collapsed, appearances still mattered in the world she came from. She moved quietly through the apartment so she would not wake Noah, and when she opened the door to leave, she found an envelope taped to it. Her heart sank. The envelope was from the building's management office. Inside was a notice stamped in bold red ink warning that if she fell behind on rent again, eviction proceedings could begin immediately. She felt the walls closing in around her as she folded the paper with trembling hands and tucked it into her bag like another wound she had to carry. She walked Noah to school, silently hoping no one would recognize her from the viral video. Several parents lingered near the entrance, whispering while glancing in her direction, but she ignored them, refusing to let shame bow her head. Noah squeezed her hand tighter than usual. "Mommy, will you be here when I get out?" he asked, his voice small. She forced a smile warm enough to hide her fear. "Always, baby. I'll always be here." She watched him disappear inside, before turning away, breathing slowly to keep her composure from breaking. When she reached the diner headquarters for her scheduled meeting, a heavy tension clung to the air like static before a storm. The corporate building stood tall and glassy, a world far removed from the diner's greasy floors and flickering lights. Inside the lobby, 2 security guards stopped her, immediately requesting identification, even though they saw her nearly every morning. They escorted her to an elevator, leading to a conference room where 3 people waited at the long, polished table. The district manager sat stiffly on one side, the corporate HR director on the other, and at the head of the table, a man in a navy suit, scrolling through his tablet with a detached expression. Emily sat when instructed, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. The navy suit man introduced himself as Regional Operations Counsel. "We appreciate your cooperation in arriving today," he began with a rehearsed formality. Emily nodded cautiously. "I just want to explain what happened." The HR director raised a hand, effectively silencing her. "Before you provide any statements, we need to clarify our position regarding last night's event." Emily waited, heart pounding, as the man in the navy suit continued. "The viral attention has put the company at risk of reputational damage. Your involvement directly contradicts our policies regarding employee conduct in sensitive environments." "My involvement?" she echoed, stunned. "You mean saving someone's life?" The district manager leaned forward, his tone sympathetic in a superficial way that made it worse. "Emily, you acted outside your role. You were not authorized to interact with a high-profile client in that manner." Emily stared at him in disbelief. He was dying. Nobody else was helping. The HR director slid a document across the table. "We have to consider liability," she said. "The family of Mr. Whitmore could interpret your actions as inappropriate contact." Emily blinked, confusion giving way to horror. "But the paramedics confirmed CPR." The woman's voice sharpened. "CPR should be performed by trained personnel. You are not certified. Emily inhaled shakily. I was certified years ago. It expired, but I still know how to do it. The operations counsel closed his tablet. Regardless of intent, the optics are damaging. Multiple news outlets have framed the incident negatively. Investors have contacted us. Insurance providers are evaluating risk exposure. Emily felt her pulse in her throat choking her. Are you saying I shouldn't have saved him? The room fell silent, as though even acknowledging the truth would be a violation of some corporate law carved in stone. Finally, the counsel said, "We are saying you created a scenario that jeopardized our brand integrity." Emily's mouth went dry. My existence is jeopardizing your brand. The HR director pushed a pen toward her atop a termination form. Effective immediately, your employment is ended. For the record, we encourage you to sign this and agree not to speak publicly about this matter. Failure to comply may result in legal consequences. Emily's vision narrowed until the edges of the room blurred. She felt dizzy, her breath shallow. You're firing me, she whispered, for saving a life. The district manager avoided her gaze, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. We cannot control public perception. We must protect the company. Something inside Emily cracked, not loudly, not with drama, but with a quiet splintering that felt irreversible. She stood her chair, scraping loudly across the floor. I need to be with my son, she said. The termination form remained on the table, untouched, its ink gleaming under the fluorescent lights like an accusation. As she walked toward the elevator, the HR director called after her, "Remember, Emily, any public statement could be grounds for defamation." She didn't look back, afraid her anger would explode into a scream that would only make everything worse. The elevator doors closed and she felt tears spill over silently down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, stepping into the lobby where several employees looked up with a mix of curiosity and judgment. One woman muttered, "She's the one from the video." Emily hurried outside, where the cold air slapped her face like a cruel reminder of reality. She walked without direction, past storefronts, past commuters, past people who had no idea their world could be torn apart in a single night. Her phone buzzed with a message from a diner where she had applied last week. The message read, "We regret to inform you we cannot move forward due to reputational concerns." Reputational concerns. She wanted to laugh, but the sound wouldn't come. She stopped on a street corner, pulling her coat closer as wind sliced through the city. Her reflection in a nearby window looked like a ghost drifting between worlds. She tried calling the unemployment office, but the automated message told her she didn't qualify because she had been terminated for misconduct. Misconduct. A word that tasted like ash. Hours later, she returned home, drained beyond measure. She found another envelope tucked under her door, this one from her landlord. A final warning. Payment required within 72 hours or eviction proceedings would begin. Her hands trembled so violently that she dropped the notice on the floor. Noah peeked out from his room, his eyes wide. "Mommy, are you okay?" She knelt, arms open, and he rushed into them. She held him tightly, burying her face in his hair while he whispered, "It's okay, Mommy, please don't cry." But she did, quietly, helplessly, because for the first time, she didn't know how to protect him. When she finally let go, the world felt smaller, darker, as though every path ahead had been blocked. She looked at the eviction notice, the viral video still blowing up online, and the reality of her firing settling like dust across her life. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "I saved him and I lost everything." The next morning, Emily walked through Boston with the dull heaviness of someone moving underwater, each step slow, each breath thick, as though the universe itself had placed a hand on her chest and pushed down. Snow from the night before had crusted over into thin sheets of ice, cracking beneath her shoes as she hurried toward the diner's corporate office, hoping maybe someone would simply listen, hoping maybe the truth still had weight in a world obsessed with perception. But the moment she stepped into the marble lobby, she felt eyes on her, sharp, curious, assessing. A receptionist whispered to another, pointing subtly in Emily's direction. Someone else raised their phone but pretended they were scrolling. Her stomach tightened. She approached the counter, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm Emily Carter. I was told to come in for a meeting." The receptionist's expression shifted instantly from neutral to guarded. "Oh, you. One moment." She made 2 calls, then gestured toward a security guard. "He'll take you." Emily followed the guard through glass doors into a hallway, so polished her reflection rippled along the floor. She was led into a small conference room where the district manager sat stiffly alongside 2 new faces, a corporate HR director and a man in a charcoal suit with thin wire-framed glasses, who radiated the quiet dominance of someone who never had to raise his voice to destroy a career. The HR director offered a shallow smile that never touched her eyes. "Thank you for coming, Emily. Please have a seat." Emily sat folding her hands in her lap to hide the shaking. The man in charcoal closed a folder, then spoke without preamble. "We are here to discuss last night's incident." Emily inhaled slowly. "I'm happy to explain anything." The man arched a brow as if explanation were not something he required. "As you might imagine, the matter has escalated significantly. Our locations are being targeted online. Sponsors are calling. Insurance has issued a warning. Your involvement has put the company in a very challenging position." "My involvement," she repeated, unable to stop the disbelief bleeding into her tone. "I saved a man's life." The HR director leaned forward, lacing her fingers. "No one is disputing that you performed chest compressions. What creates difficulty is the context." Context. Emily felt something cold crawl up her spine. This context, she thought, meant a video clip to look like a kiss. The man in charcoal slid a printed screenshot across the table. The freeze frame showed her leaning over Julian, her mouth pressed against his in the middle of a rescue breath. Out of context, it looked intimate, inappropriate, manufactured. "This image," he said flatly, "has been interpreted by the public as misconduct. Some commenters have used the term assault." Emily's breath caught. Assault. CPR is not assault. He was dying. The district manager, who had once joked with her during slow shifts, cleared his throat, refusing to meet her eyes. "Emily, you have to understand the optics are unfavorable. Investors have already contacted us. Your shift last night violated certain procedural expectations." She blinked. What expectations? There was no one else helping him. The HR director raised a hand, silencing her. "The issue is not whether you meant harm. The issue is that your actions created a narrative that jeopardizes our brand." "A narrative," she repeated, stunned. "Someone was dying. I did what any human being would do." The man in charcoal clasped his hands. "That is admirable, but unfortunately not relevant. What matters is perception. A billionaire CEO was involved. His security team is already pushing inquiries. His PR division is preparing statements. Everything about this situation is delicate and unpredictable, and for us, unpredictable equals dangerous." Emily felt the air thin in her lungs. "Are you saying I shouldn't have saved him?" No one answered. Silence itself became an accusation. The HR director finally slid a packet toward Emily. "We are terminating your employment effective immediately due to misconduct creating reputational harm." Emily stared at the words swimming on the page, terminating employment, misconduct, reputational harm. She whispered, "This cannot be real. I followed every step CPR class teaches." The HR director smiled politely. "But you are not currently certified. That alone places the company at risk." Emily felt a crack open inside her, small but sharp like splintering bone. "So, if I let him die," she said quietly, "that would have protected your brand." The district manager winced. "Emily, do not say things like that." She pushed the packet away. "I'm not signing anything." The man in charcoal shrugged, a gesture so subtle it burned. "Whether you sign or not, the termination stands. We also strongly advise you not to speak publicly. If you discuss this or make defamatory statements about our company, legal action may follow." Emily felt her pulse thudding harshly in her ears. "You're threatening me because I saved the wrong man." The HR director replied softly, "We're asking you to be reasonable." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping sharply across the floor. "Reasonable," she repeated, voice trembling. "I did everything right. I acted when no one else did. I saved someone's life, and you're punishing me for it." The man in charcoal slid his folder into a briefcase. "Miss Carter, when billionaires are involved, every detail matters. Our duty is to the company, not to your personal circumstances." Her throat tightened. "My personal circumstances? I have a child. I'm a single mother. This job is how I pay rent." The HR director sighed, as though Emily were making an inconvenience of her own suffering. "We sympathize. But the situation has escalated far beyond our control." When Emily left the building, snow drifted in soft spirals around her, but she barely felt the cold. She moved through the city in a haze, unaware of the traffic honking, the pedestrians brushing past her, the city rattling with noise and movement. Her phone buzzed. A message from her landlord. "Final reminder, payment is overdue." Another buzz. Her health insurance stating the loss of employment meant immediate cancellation. Another message. A diner she applied to last month, writing, "We must withdraw your application due to circulation of concerning media." Concerning media. The words cut deeper than any insult. As she turned a corner, two teenagers nudged each other, whispering loud enough for her to hear, "That's her, the billionaire kisser." One lifted his phone. She flinched away, nearly stumbling on the icy curb. She ducked into a side street, pressing a shaking hand to her forehead, her breath a trembling fog. She had saved a life. She had done what she wished someone had done the night her husband lay dying, waiting for help that came too late. And now she was being erased, replaced with a false narrative more entertaining than the truth. When she finally reached her apartment, Noah ran to her instantly, sensing something wrong. "Mommy, why are you crying?" She knelt, hugging him tightly. "Everything will be okay," she whispered, though the words tasted like breaking glass in her throat. She looked over his shoulder to the stack of overdue bills, the eviction notice, the food running out, the silence that felt heavier than ever. She whispered again, not sure whether it was a vow or a plea, "I saved him and I lost everything." Julian Whitmore surfaced from unconsciousness, as though he were swimming upward through black water that clung to him, refusing to let go until a voice broke through, faint but steady, counting softly somewhere in the darkness, and guiding him toward light. When his eyes finally opened, he found himself lying in a private suite at Whitmore Medical Center, surrounded by soft beeping monitors and the filtered winter sunlight spilling across the polished floor. His chest ached sharply with every breath, and his throat felt raw, as if scraped from the inside. A nurse hurried to his side, startled to see him conscious. "Mr. Whitmore, you're awake, thank God." He blinked slowly, trying to gather his thoughts. "What happened?" "You went into sudden cardiac arrest at a diner. You received CPR before paramedics arrived." CPR. The word echoed in his skull, stirring something deeper, a memory blurred by panic and oxygen deprivation, yet vivid enough to make his pulse stutter. He felt again the pressure on his chest, the faint warmth of someone close, the whisper of numbers being counted in a trembling voice, a woman's voice. He closed his eyes, trying to picture her, but all he caught was a fleeting sensation of safety threaded through chaos. The nurse adjusted his IV line, continuing gently. "Someone performed compressions and rescue breaths until help arrived. It saved your life." Julian's brows furrowed. "Who?" She hesitated. "We don't have a full report yet. There's been significant media attention, and your PR team requested minimal disclosure." PR. Of course they had intervened even before he regained consciousness. He swallowed hard, throat dry. "I need to know who she was." The nurse blinked, surprised. "She?" He nodded, though he didn't know how he knew. "I heard her voice." The nurse cleared her throat, looking uneasy. "I'll notify your chief of staff." She stepped out quickly, leaving him alone with the humming machines and the faint ache beneath his ribs. Julian rubbed his forehead, piecing together fragments of the night. He had gone to the diner for solitude, needing a break from the cutthroat board meetings, the endless corporate backstabbing, and Mark Harlan, his CFO, whose ambition had begun to taste like something poisonous. Julian remembered sitting in the booth reading financial projections, then feeling a crushing pain stabbing through his chest, like a fist squeezing his heart. After that, only darkness, broken by that soft, urgent voice. "Breathe. Come back." His phone buzzed on the bedside table. He grabbed it, noticing dozens of missed messages from the board, from investors, from PR teams, and predictably from Mark. One message from Mark read, already on top of the media fallout. "We'll have everything contained." Media fallout? Julian frowned, opening a link automatically generated by the PR monitoring system. His breath hitched. The top trending headline read, "Waitress crosses line with unconscious billionaire CEO." A blurry freeze frame of someone bending over him filled the screen. The comments were vicious. Gold digger, clout chaser, predator. He felt a surge of anger so sharp he gripped the phone with enough force to crack it. He tried scrolling further, but the nurse returned with Dr. Ramsey, his cardiologist, and his chief of staff, Lauren Kim, both wearing identical masks of polite concern. "Julian, we need to review your condition first," Dr. Ramsey said firmly. "You experienced ventricular fibrillation, likely triggered by stress and fatigue. We stabilized you, but you're not out of the woods. No strenuous activity, no travel, no board meetings until we complete further testing." Julian nodded impatiently. "Fine. But tell me who performed CPR." Lauren and Ramsey exchanged a look that made Julian's jaw tighten. Finally, Lauren spoke. "We are still reviewing details." "What details?" he snapped. "Someone saved my life." "Why is that not the first thing I'm hearing?" Lauren exhaled. "There is complexity." "Complexity," he repeated, incredulous. Lauren continued. "The CPR was captured in a viral video. The rescuer is receiving negative attention, Some believe the contact was inappropriate. Julian felt his body go cold. Inappropriate. She saved my life. The nurse flinched at the steel creeping into his tone. Lauren tried placating him. The optics need to be handled carefully. Your position makes every detail potentially explosive. The board believes it's better to keep distance until we know more. Distance. The word felt filthy. He swung his legs over the bed, ignoring the doctor's startled protest. Bring me the footage, Lauren paled. Julian, you need rest. I'm not asking. He stared at her until she relented, whispering, I'll get it. Minutes later she returned with a tablet and placed it in his hands, as though handing over something fragile or dangerous. Julian hit play. He watched himself collapse, watched executives in expensive suits recoil, watched panic bloom in the room. Then he saw her, Emily. Though he didn't yet know her name, she burst into frame, dropping to her knees beside him, her movements swift, terrified, determined. He watched her check for a pulse, tilt his chin, give him air. His throat tightened. There was nothing inappropriate. There was only urgency and courage. And then he saw security yank her back, and executives shouting to remove her. His grip on the tablet trembled with fury. Who pulled her away? Mark's voice came from the doorway, smooth and slippery as always. Ah, so you've seen it. Mark stepped forward, shrugging casually. Unfortunately, the situation is more complicated than it looks. We're already containing the narrative. Containing. Julian repeated the word, feeling something dark coil in his stomach. She saved me. And you threw her out, like a criminal. Mark held up his hands. Julian, with respect, we cannot allow an employee or stranger to appear as if they crossed professional boundaries. Public perception is fragile. The stock price dipped. Investors asked questions. We had to act. Julian stared at him, stunned by the audacity. Had to act. So you let the world attack the only person who stepped in, when all of you stood back. Mark forced a tight smile. It's unfortunate, but necessary. She's already been suspended from her job. Soon it will fade. People move on. Julian's chest tightened, but this time not from his heart condition. A heat rose inside him, fierce, unyielding. No, he said quietly. They don't move on. Because this isn't fading. This is a lie. He lifted the tablet, replaying the moment Emily breathed air into him, counting softly, her eyebrows knit in fear and determination. Something inside him shifted, not gratitude. Something deeper, threaded with anger, guilt, and an inexplicable pull he didn't want to name yet. I want her found, he said. Lauren stiffened. Julian PR strongly advises against direct involvement. Anything you say or do could escalate the story. Mark added, we need to protect your image. Julian looked up, his voice calm but razor sharp. My image does not matter more than the truth. Find her. I want her name, her address, and everything that happened to her because of this. Lauren hesitated, but when Julian's expression hardened, she nodded reluctantly. I'll have the footage traced. Julian leaned back against the pillows, exhausted but ignited. As the room emptied, his eyes drifted again to the freeze frame lingering on Emily's face, the courage etched in the small tremor of her jaw, the steadiness of her hands, the softness of her breath that had pulled him back from death itself. He pressed a hand to his chest where her palms had been, and whispered, barely audible, I remember you. Julian didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard her voice again, faint but urgent, counting for him, breathing for him, fighting for him. When the people paid to protect him hesitated, he kept replaying the diner footage on the hospital tablet, pausing on her face, studying the fear, the determination, the desperation etched in every movement. She wasn't performing. She wasn't seeking attention. She was terrified of losing him, a stranger. And he couldn't understand why. That thought tightened something deep inside his chest, harder than any arrhythmia ever had. By dawn he had watched the video 17 times. On the 18th he noticed something new. The moment security yanked her away, Emily didn't protest for herself. She protested for him. She kept reaching toward his chest, her fingers trembling as though she still feared his heart might stop again. He whispered to the empty room, why did you keep fighting for me? A knock interrupted his thoughts. Lauren entered, looking exhausted, holding a printed packet. We identified her, she said, placing the papers on the rolling table. Emily Carter, waitress, 32 years old, single mother, one son, Noah, age 7. Lives in East Boston. No criminal history. Excellent work record. And then her voice dropped. She was fired this morning. Julian's jaw clenched. Fired. For saving my life. Lauren nodded slowly. The diner claims misconduct. They say the situation created reputational harm. Julian stared at her, disbelief swirling with anger. They destroyed her income, her reputation, her stability, because she kept me alive. Lauren hesitated. There's more. She slid another sheet forward. Emily's landlord issued an eviction warning. Due in 72 hours. Julian felt the air leave his lungs. She's being punished for something she didn't do, he whispered. Lauren exhaled. People online are vicious. There are petitions trying to ban her from food service. She's trending, and not in a good way. Julian's stomach twisted. Show me. Lauren pulled up social media streams, hundreds of thousands of comments. Not one of them showed the truth. They showed the freeze frame, the worst possible angle. They called her names Julian refused to repeat. They accused her of targeting him. They mocked Noah. Julian's hand tightened on the tablet so hard the plastic creaked. Lauren said softly, Julian, this could turn worse if you get involved publicly. Mark insists we stay silent. Julian looked up sharply. Mark insists, but what do you insist? Lauren swallowed. I think she's drowning while everyone watches. And you're the only one whose voice could cut through the noise. Julian stood, despite the cardiologist's orders, his IV tugging. Get the car, he said. Lauren startled. Julian, you can't leave the hospital yet. Your heart is unstable. Get the car, he repeated. Or, I will walk. Lauren closed her eyes, defeated. I'll arrange it. An hour later, Julian stepped out of the private hospital exit, bundled in a heavy coat, his breath visible in the bitter morning air. A black SUV waited. Lauren opened the door. This is reckless, she whispered, but I'm coming with you. They drove through the city, the expensive buildings giving way to aging brick apartments, cracked sidewalks, rusted fire escapes, and corners where snow turned to muddy slush. Julian watched quietly, feeling the weight of guilt settle heavy in his chest. This is the world she protects her son in, he murmured. And we made it harder for her. The car pulled up to a narrow street, where the buildings leaned like tired old men. Lauren pointed to the second floor. That's her place. Julian stepped out before the driver fully stopped. He wasn't prepared for the sight waiting on the stoop. Emily. She stood wrapped in a thin jacket, holding 2 grocery bags so heavy they pulled at her shoulders. Her hair was tied in a rushed, messy bun, strands falling against her face. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold. She looked exhausted, far more than someone her age should. And still, even through fatigue, there was softness in her features, a strength that tugged at Julian's chest unexpectedly. Julian froze suddenly, unsure how to approach her. What did one say to the woman who breathed for him, who lost everything because of him, who the world had turned into a villain overnight? Emily looked up, noticing the SUV, then the suited figures behind him. Her body tensed instantly, her grip tightening on the grocery bags. She stepped back toward the stairs, guarded. Jamie, is that the landlord? She muttered under her breath, then louder, who are you? Lauren stepped forward gently. Miss Carter, this is Julian Whitmore. Emily's eyes widened in shock before narrowing with wariness. The billionaire, the one I saved. She corrected herself quickly, the one I performed CPR on. What do you want? Her voice was cold but trembling barely. Julian stepped closer, slowly, as though approaching a frightened animal. I wanted to thank you. Emily's expression darkened. Too late for that. He flinched at the words. She tried brushing past him, but the grocery bag tore slightly, spilling apples onto the wet steps. She dropped to her knees, trying to collect them with shaking hands. Noah needs food, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Julian bent down instinctively to help, but she jerked away. Don't. Someone was filming nearby, and Emily noticed instantly, pulling her hood up. Of course, she whispered bitterly, even here they follow me. Julian felt something fierce rise inside him, protective and furious. He turned toward the man recording. Stop filming. The man smirked. Public street, fair game. Julian stepped forward, the authority in his voice slicing the air. I said stop. The man hesitated, then lowered the phone, muttering as he walked away. Emily stared at Julian, stunned by the sudden command. She stood slowly, clutching the torn bag to her chest. Why are you here? Julian swallowed. I saw the footage. All of it. Emily stiffened. So you know the truth then? I know you saved my life, he said quietly. And I know the world punished you for it. She looked away, her throat tight. Doesn't matter. Truth doesn't win when money talks louder. Julian stepped closer. You shouldn't have lost your job. The diner had no right. She laughed under her breath, a humorless, tired sound. Right. People like me don't get rights. We get warnings, terminations, evictions, scandals. She lifted her chin as if bracing herself for impact. If you came to make yourself feel better, you can leave. He stared at her, stunned by her strength, her refusal to be pitied. Emily, he said softly, I came because I owe you my life. She blinked, her breathing hitching faintly. Something in Julian's chest clenched. Attraction arrived quietly, not with heat, but with gravity. He noticed the faint freckles across her cheeks, the steady courage in her eyes, the vulnerability she tried to hide beneath exhaustion. Emily stepped back, shaking her head. Don't look at me like that. Like what? Like you see me, she whispered. I'm used to being unseen. Julian's breath slowed. I see you because you were the only person who saw me when it mattered. A gust of wind cut between them, Emily shivering. Julian shrugged off his coat, offering it instinctively. She hesitated, then refused. Don't. If someone takes another picture, they'll say, I'm using you. Julian felt anger spike again. The world warped her kindness into shame. He wanted to fix it. He promised himself he would, but first he needed to understand her suffering fully. Emily, he said carefully, what happened after that night? She hugged the torn bag closer. Everything, she whispered, breaking on the last syllable. I lost everything. Julian's heart split cleanly, guilt and something deeper, blooming into a vow he could not walk away from. Emily didn't let Julian into her apartment that first morning, even when the wind cut harshly against her thin jacket, even when her fingers trembled so badly she nearly dropped the torn grocery bag again. She didn't trust him, couldn't trust him, not because he was a stranger, but because he came from a world where people's lives were chess pieces, and hers had already been sacrificed for optics. Julian seemed to sense this. He didn't push. He simply said softly, I'll be here if you need anything, then stepped back, allowing her space even as something inside him ached when he watched her walk away. But he didn't leave. He climbed into the SUV and told Lauren quietly, find out everything that's been done to her. Not rumors. Facts. Lauren nodded, already scrolling through her phone, her jaw tight. She hated Mark Harlan as much as Julian did, maybe more, after seeing what he had done to the only person who deserved praise. Meanwhile, upstairs, Emily unlocked her door and stepped inside the apartment, shutting it quickly behind her, before pressing her back against the wood, her breath coming fast and shallow. Her hands were shaking harder now, the adrenaline of confronting Julian wearing off, and reality slamming back into her. She looked at the torn grocery bag, the few apples rolling unevenly across the scratched floor, and she wanted to scream or cry or collapse, but she didn't. Because Noah appeared at his bedroom door, rubbing his eyes and whispering, Mommy, you're back early. She forced herself upright, summoned a smile, and said softly, just had to get a few things, baby. Noah ran to her, hugging her tightly. Mommy, kids at school said something mean again. Something about you and that man on the TV. Emily's heart constricted painfully. What did they say? Noah hesitated, then whispered, they said you kissed him to steal his money. Emily forced a slow breath. That's not true. You know that. Noah nodded, but the hurt in his eyes made her feel like she'd failed him more deeply than losing her job ever could. She placed the groceries on the counter and unpacked them mechanically. She had only bought essentials, bread, milk, 2 small bags of rice, bananas for Noah, eggs she wasn't even sure she could afford. Her phone buzzed. She flinched. Another message from an unknown number. Another threat. Another accusation. Another stranger who treated her like a public villain. She deleted it. Then another came. And another. Her entire screen filled with hate she didn't deserve. Hours later, while Emily tried to piece together a plan to survive the next 72 hours, a knock sounded at her door, sharp and official. Her stomach dropped. CPS. She opened the door slowly. A woman in a gray coat and a man carrying a clipboard stood there. Miss Emily Carter. Yes, we're here regarding the welfare notice for your son Noah. Noah peeked from behind her legs nervously. The woman's tone was polite but firm. We need to assess the environment and ensure there are no concerns for the child's well-being given recent events. Emily swallowed hard. I didn't do anything wrong. The man checked his clipboard. The report cites widespread media coverage regarding an incident with a high-profile individual. The phrasing read public misconduct. Noah's fingers tightened around her hand. Emily forced her voice to remain steady. I saved someone. That's all. The woman said gently, we're not here to judge. We just need to verify Noah's safety. Emily stepped aside, letting them enter. They walked through the small apartment, taking notes quietly. The man checked the fridge. He wrote something down. Emily felt humiliation burn through her. Then Noah's school counselor called CPS, because her fridge wasn't full enough. Because she was poor. because a billionaire's scandal dragged her into a spotlight she never asked for. After what felt like hours, the CPS team stood by her door again. "We'll need to follow up in a few days," they said. "We'll call ahead." Emily nodded, but fear pressed like a fist against her ribs. The moment they left, she locked the door, then pressed her forehead against it, shaking uncontrollably. Noah touched her arm. "Mommy, did I do something wrong?" She dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms. "Baby, no. None of this is your fault." She held him tightly, rocking him gently, until his breathing steadied, but her own wouldn't. Meanwhile, Julian returned to his penthouse despite the doctor's objections, pacing across the pristine floors, as Lauren briefed him on everything she'd uncovered. Emily Carter suspended, then fired due to fabricated misconduct, online harassment campaigns including targeted doxing, eviction notice delivered, lost job prospects due to viral defamation. CPS involvement triggered by a malicious anonymous report likely linked to someone with access to her file. Lauren hesitated, then added, "There's a digital footprint that leads back to internal servers at Whitmore Holdings." Julian stopped walking, his expression sharpening with anger so cold it steadied him. "Mark," Lauren nodded. "Or someone taking orders from him." Julian's voice dropped lower. "Dangerous, find out exactly who. I want evidence. I want timestamps. I want every detail." Lauren swallowed. "Understood. But Julian, there's more." She pulled up a silent video clip. A neighbor had recorded Emily leaving her apartment earlier, her face pale, her shoulders shaking her, trying to collect groceries from the ground, while bystanders whispered and pointed. Julian felt something in him twist sharply. "This is what we did to her," he whispered. Guilt surged through him, fierce, unrelenting, because although he didn't know Emily, he knew enough. She was surviving in a world stacked against her even before she stepped into that diner. And his world, the world of unchecked power, cold boardrooms, and ruthless PR, had crushed her simply to protect him. He sat heavily on the edge of his bed, running a hand through his hair. "She saved my life, and we destroyed hers." Lauren stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on the back of the chair. "Julian, there is still time to fix this, but the board won't like it. Mark won't." Julian lifted his head, eyes burning with resolve. "I'm not asking permission. I'm taking responsibility." At that exact moment across the city, Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the CPS card left on the counter. She hadn't eaten since morning, but hunger didn't matter. Only fear, and exhaustion, and the unbearable pressure of trying to stay afloat while every system designed to judge her was sharpening knives. She whispered to the empty room, "I don't know how much more I can lose." And just as her voice cracked, the phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. She braced herself for hate. But the message read, "Emily, it's Noah's teacher. CPS visited the school today. They asked questions about you." Emily stared at the wall, her breath leaving her as though someone had punched her hard. Meanwhile, Julian stood before his floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at the freezing Boston skyline, feeling the first real fear he'd felt in years, not for himself but for a woman he barely knew yet could not stop thinking about, a woman whose trembling voice kept echoing inside him. A woman who counted breaths for him when he could not fight for himself. He whispered into the quiet room, "I won't let the world destroy her. Not again." Emily woke the next morning with a jolt, as if fear itself had shaken her awake. She checked on Noah, first watching his small chest rise and fall peacefully in sleep, his stuffed blue dinosaur tucked beneath his chin. For a moment she stood there, letting the sight fill her with something warm enough to keep her from collapsing. But the moment she stepped back into the kitchen, reality crashed down again. The CPS card, the eviction notice, the empty fridge, her job gone, her name smeared, and worst of all, the knowledge that she had no more room to fall. She brewed the last of her cheap coffee, and sat at the small, wobbly table, gripping the mug with both hands to keep them from shaking. She kept replaying the encounter with Julian yesterday, the shock of seeing him, the guilt she saw flicker in his eyes, the confusing pull inside her chest when he stood close enough that she could feel his warmth even in the icy wind. But she couldn't let herself feel anything. Not now. Not when survival demanded every ounce of her strength. She dressed Noah, bundled him in his winter coat, and walked him to school with forced cheerfulness, ignoring the stares from parents whispering behind gloved hands, pretending to check their phones while pointing to her. Noah squeezed her hand tighter than usual. "Mommy, they said more stuff today." Emily bent down, touching his cheek. "Kids repeat what adults say, sweetheart. Remember that. None of this is your fault." After dropping him off, she headed toward the bus stop, ready to make another desperate attempt to find work, even if only for a few hours a day. But when she reached the corner, she froze. A black SUV idled, their windows-tinted engine humming with quiet luxury that did not belong in her neighborhood, and leaning against it, hands in his pockets, coat buttoned against the cold, was Julian Whitmore. She stopped, 3 steps away, instinctively ready to flee. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was thin, sharp, defensive. Julian straightened, pushing off the SUV with a quiet exhale. "I came to see you." Her eyes narrowed. "Why? Haven't you done enough?" He took the blow without flinching. "I know. And I deserve that. But please let me talk." Emily shook her head, backing up half a step. "People are staring." Someone across the street had already lifted their phone, angling it toward them. Emily dropped her gaze, adjusting her hood. "This is exactly what I don't need." Julian followed her line of sight and immediately lifted a hand toward the SUV. The driver stepped out subtly, shifting in front of the person recording, blocking the view. Emily stared, surprised. Julian spoke softly. "I'm not here to make things worse. I'm here because things are worse than they should ever have been. And I'm responsible." She shook her head hard. "No, you're not. Your people are. Your world is. But you were unconscious. You didn't ask anyone to destroy my life." But Emily's voice cracked as she whispered, "But they did anyway." Julian stepped closer, but slowly, carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Please let me help." Emily let out a short, humorless laugh. "Help? Help how?" "Give me a check so people can call me a gold digger," even louder. "Maybe pay off the media so they can turn me into a charity case." "No, thank you. I'm not for sale." Julian flinched at her words. "I'm not here to buy anything. Especially not your dignity." She crossed her arms, partly from cold, partly from fear. "Then what do you want?" Julian hesitated, searching her face for permission before speaking. "I want to undo what my world did to you. I want to make this right." A long beat passed. Her breath fogged in the air. She shook her head again, but softer this time, more uncertain. "You don't know what right looks like in my world. Come with me," he said quietly. "Let me show you." She stared at him, baffled. "Show me what?" "Show you that I'm not here to pity you. I'm here because you saved my life. And I can't walk away from what you're going through." Something in his voice almost cracked on the last words, like the weight of it was too heavy. Against her better judgment, against every instinct telling her not to trust, she whispered, "Where?" He opened the SUV door gently. "Just a drive. If you hate it, you can walk away. I won't follow." She didn't move at first. Then a gust of cold wind hit her face, and she realized she didn't have the strength to stand alone in the storm anymore. She climbed into the SUV, sitting stiffly, pulling her coat close. Julian sat beside her, giving her space, keeping his voice steady. "Emily, I saw everything." She swallowed. "Everything. The full footage. My PR team hid it. My CFO pushed a narrative that made you the villain because it was easier than admitting the truth." "And what is the truth?" she whispered. "That you were the only one in that room with a conscience." Emily blinked rapidly, her throat tightening. Julian continued, softer now. "That you did what none of them had the courage to do. That you fought for me. More than anyone ever has." Emily looked out the window, trying to hide the emotion rising in her chest. After a quiet moment, Julian nodded to the driver, who began moving through traffic. They passed rows of brick buildings and empty storefronts until they reached a community kitchen with a long line of families waiting outside. Emily frowned. "Why are we here?" Julian's voice lowered. "This is one of the programs my company funds. I've never visited. I've only signed checks. And when I saw what was happening to you, I realized money isn't enough. I need to understand the world that's breaking people while my boardroom argues about stock projections." Emily studied him, surprised by the honesty. Julian continued, "I want to see what you see. I want to understand the weight you carry every day." She didn't know how to respond. For the first time in days, she didn't feel invisible. They stepped out of the car and walked toward the building. A volunteer recognized Julian and gasped, whispering to someone else. Phones lifted again, but Julian gently waved them down. "Please don't. This isn't about me." He entered the kitchen, handing out boxes of vegetables, helping an elderly woman carry her bags to the curb. Emily watched, stunned. For a man raised in billion-dollar circles, he moved without ego, without entitlement. He turned to Emily after a while. "This is what you deal with every day, isn't it? Stretching every dollar, doing everything alone." Emily nodded slowly. "Yes, this is the real world, my world. And no one cares until it becomes a scandal." Julian looked down at his hands, the same hands she had pressed against his chest to keep him alive. "I saw the CPS report," he admitted quietly. Emily stiffened. How? Lauren told me. Emily swallowed hard, humiliation burning through her. They came to my home because I'm poor. Because of that video. Because it's easier for systems to punish single moms than to question rich men. Julian's jaw tightened. You shouldn't have to defend your ability to mother because of a lie. Emily breathed shakily. You don't understand. I could lose Noah. They don't need proof. They just need doubt. Julian exhaled slowly, as if absorbing her fear directly into his chest. Then I'll remove the doubt, all of it. Emily's eyes flashed with panic. No. If you intervene, everyone will think you're protecting your mistress. They already accuse me of using you. If you help me now, it will get worse. Julian stepped closer, lowering his voice. Then, I'll help you quietly. Emily stared at him, torn between distrust and the faint, dangerous warmth rising inside her at his determination. Why are you doing this? Because I owe you my life, he said simply. And because when I was dying I heard your voice telling me to breathe. Nobody talks to me like that. Emily's breath caught her heart stumbling. Julian took a step back, giving her space, aware she was overwhelmed. Let me show you one more thing, he said gently. The SUV drove them deeper into her neighborhood, past peeling paint and cracked sidewalks until it stopped outside a small after-school center. Julian pointed. This is Noah's school satellite program. Emily blinked. How do you know that? Julian hesitated. When Lauren brought me the records, I saw the notes. Noah is gifted in science. He participates in robotics club. He's 7 and already building circuits. Emily's lips parted. How do you know that? Julian's voice softened in a way that made something warm flicker unsteadily in her chest. Because I asked. Because your son matters. Because you matter. Emily looked down, unable to meet his eyes. No one has ever said that like it was true. Julian swallowed a lump, rising unexpectedly. Emily, I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to stand beside you. She shook her head. You don't know me. He stepped closer. I know what you look like when you fight for someone you've never met. I know what your voice sounds like when you refuse to give up. I know you saved me even when it cost you everything. And I know that I've thought about that moment every hour since I woke up. Attraction simmered between them, subtle but undeniable. Emily felt it too, and stepped back, needing space before she drowned in it. Julian didn't push. He simply said quietly, let me walk you home. They walked slowly through the cold, their breaths turning white in the wind. For a few moments the world felt almost still. But as they reached her, building a figure stepped out from the shadows. Mark Harlan. Julian froze. Emily stiffened. Mark smirked, cold, sharp. Well, looks like the waitress found her billionaire after all. Julian's voice dropped into a tone Emily had never heard from him before. What are you doing here? Mark shrugged, glancing at Emily with thinly veiled contempt. Assessing damage, making sure liability stays contained. Emily's blood ran cold. Mark leaned in slightly. You think the board will let you ruin everything for some broke single mom? Wake up, Julian. Walk away now or you're finished. Julian's jaw flexed, fury rising in him like a tidal wave. And Emily watched, stunned, as he stepped between her and Mark, not like a billionaire protecting an investment, but like a man protecting someone who mattered deeply to him. Julian said quietly, try threatening her again, and I'll make sure you're the one who gets finished. Mark's smirk faltered. Emily stared, breath unsteady. And in that frozen, breathless moment, she realized something terrifying and electric. The richest man she'd ever met had stepped fully into her world, not as a savior, not as a spectator, but as someone who refused to leave her to fight alone. Mark's smirk thinned into something sharper, colder, and for a brief second, Emily saw exactly what Julian had been battling long before she ever met him. Not a man, but an ambition wearing a tailored suit. Mark stepped closer until the street lamp carved deep shadows across his face. This isn't personal, Julian. It's business. And you know better than anyone that business cannot afford vulnerability. Julian didn't move. His shoulders squared instinctively, blocking Mark's line of sight to Emily as if his body understood its purpose before his mind could label it. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, clutching her fraying coat, feeling the cold nibble at her fingers while something even colder wrapped around her heart. Mark flicked his gaze toward her with a low scoff. Look at her. Look at this place, this neighborhood. You think the board will let you jeopardize billions for a woman whose entire life fits in a 2-room apartment? Julian's jaw tightened. You're speaking about the woman who kept me alive. Mark waved a dismissive hand. That narrative plays well in fairy tales, not on Wall Street. Already investors are noticing your silence. Reporters are hunting for a statement. The board wants to contain the mess before it grows teeth. Emily's stomach twisted. Contain, she whispered as if the word were a disease. Mark looked at her with false sympathy, more venom than empathy in his eyes. People like you always get hurt when you step into circles you don't belong in. You were nothing but an unfortunate headline. A liability. That's why we shut you down early. Julian's breath left him in one hard exhale. He stepped forward, voice low and lethal. You leaked her information to CPS. You orchestrated the smear campaign. You weaponized poverty. Mark smirked unfazed. I managed a threat. Exactly what a CFO is meant to do. Emily felt the world tilt slightly. This man, this stranger, had triggered CPS into her home, had made her son cry, had pushed her toward eviction, and now he stood here rationalizing her suffering as strategy. Julian spoke again, his voice trembling with barely controlled rage. You think power is measured by how many people you can crush? Mark's smile thinned. No. But the board does. And if you protect her now, you will lose everything you've built. You'll lose your seat, your influence, your company. You'll lose everything except the scandal. The knife-edge truth hung in the air. Emily felt it slice through her. Julian had worked his entire life to build Whitmore Health Systems, brick by brick, policy by policy, reform by reform. And she, a nobody waitress, could become the catalyst that cost him everything. She stepped forward, swallowing her trembling voice. Julian, stop. He turned to her, shocked by the pain in her tone. Don't do this, she continued, voice breaking. He's right. You'll lose everything. And I'm not worth that. Julian stared at her, as if she'd spoken in another language. Not worth that. Emily wrapped her arms tightly around herself as though bracing against invisible impact. Look at what's happened already. People stalk my building. My son is terrified. CPS is watching me. I can barely afford food. If you stand beside me publicly, your world will burn. Mark folded his arms smug. Listen to her. She understands the calculus of survival. Julian stepped closer to Emily, his voice soft but fierce. Don't say you're not worth it. Your life, your dignity, your son's safety, they matter. More than shareholders, more than board seats, more than every empty metric you think defines value. Something hot and dangerous bloomed in Emily's chest, a mix of hope and terror. She shook her head desperately. You can't fix my world with money. You can't erase the hate. And you can't protect me from the lies. Julian exhaled slowly. Maybe not, but I can stand beside you while you face them. Emily's breath hitched, her heartbeat skittering in her chest. She whispered, why? Why me? Why risk everything for someone like me? Julian stepped closer until the cold night wind swirled around them like a current. Because when I couldn't breathe, you gave me yours. Because when everyone else froze, you moved. Because you saw me as a man, not a billionaire. And because after everything I've witnessed, the only thing that feels right is standing with you. Emily felt her knees weaken. Attraction wasn't new, she'd felt flickers of it before, but this was different, deeper, heavier, dangerous, like gravity shifting beneath her feet. Mark's voice cut harshly between them. Enough. Julian, the board called an emergency meeting. They expect you within the hour. And if you walk into that room still defending her, you'll walk out without your title. Julian's eyes didn't leave Emily's. Then I walk out without it. Mark blinked, startled. What? Julian finally turned toward him, his voice calm, terrifyingly calm. I would rather lose my empire with integrity than keep it built on a lie. Mark's face reddened, fury choking him. You're choosing her. Julian answered without hesitation. I'm choosing what's right. Mark stepped forward, lowering his voice. If you do this, I'll bury her further. I'll make sure CPS removes her kid. I'll spin the narrative so tightly the world will never believe her again. Emily's breath shattered. No. Please don't. Julian's voice dropped to ice. You touch her or her son and I will destroy you legally, publicly, professionally. Mark swallowed, something like fear flickering in his eyes. But he wasn't finished. He leaned in with a final venomous whisper toward Julian. When love gets mixed with power, someone always bleeds. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the street. The silence after he left felt heavy, suffocating. Emily leaned back against the stair rail, trying to steady herself. Her voice cracked. Julian, why did you say that to him? Why tell him you'd risk everything? Julian stepped closer, lowering his voice. Because the moment someone threatened your son, I knew exactly where I stood. Emily's lashes trembled, her breath forming a shaky cloud in the night air. Julian said gently but firmly, Emily, the world will demand that I choose between power and what's right. But I'm already choosing. And it's you. Her heart squeezed, painfully torn between longing and terror. She stepped back, shaking her head. You can't say things like that. Your position, your influence, your legacy, everything is on the line, Julian whispered back, then let it fall. I've carried this empire since I was 22. And it nearly killed me. I'm not afraid to lose it. I'm afraid of losing the only person who looked at me like I was worth saving. Emily closed her eyes, fighting tears. She whispered, what if standing next to me destroys you? Julian answered simply, then let it, because standing far away from you is already destroying me. The words hung between them, electric, fragile, terrifying. Emily's breath hitched. She felt it then, fully, undeniably, the pull between them, stronger than fear, sharper than caution. But reality crashed back like cold water. She shook her head desperately. I can't need you, Julian. I can't afford to. I have to protect Noah. I have to survive this. Julian reached for her hand slowly, letting her pull away if she wanted. She didn't. Emily, he murmured, you don't have to survive this alone. For the first time she didn't pull her hand back, but she whispered with breaking softness, if you do this, Mark will come after you. He already is, Julian replied quietly. Let him. Emily's voice lowered into a cracked whisper. Julian, if you lose everything because of me, I'll never forgive myself. Julian shook his head. If I lose everything but keep my humanity, that's a victory. And if I lose everything but keep you and Noah safe, that's a purpose. Emily blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. She whispered, don't say things like that unless you're ready to mean them. Julian held her gaze, steady, unwavering. I do mean them. Every word. Their breath mingled in the cold, as though the world itself paused, waiting for one of them to step over the line that emotion had already erased. But then, a car door slammed somewhere down the block, snapping them from the fragile moment. Emily pulled back, clutching her coat. She whispered shakily, you should go. Julian took a slow breath but nodded. I'll go. But I'm not stepping away. Not now. Not ever. Emily watched him walk to the SUV, not knowing whether she felt safer or more endangered by his vow. And as he drove off, disappearing around the corner, she pressed a trembling hand to her chest, feeling her heart pound with something that terrified her more than Mark Harlan ever could. Hope. The boardroom at Whitmore Holdings had hosted wars before, corporate wars, political wars, ego-driven wars, but never a war like the one unfolding this morning, as Julian stepped through the glass doors with the quiet certainty of a man who already knew he was outnumbered. Executives lined the long mahogany table, their expressions tense, guarded, calculating. Screens along the walls displayed charts of dipping stock prices, trending hashtags, headlines, twisting the truth into something grotesque. And at the center of it all, like a serpent coiled in silk, sat Mark Harlan, hands folded, expression triumphant. Julian took his seat at the head of the table. He didn't bother opening the folders waiting for him. He already knew what they contained: half-truths, manipulated reports, risk assessments devoid of humanity. Mark leaned back lazily. Our agenda is simple. We must finalize the statement that distances the company from the Waitress and reasserts control of the narrative. Emily's name, wrapped in Mark's voice, made Julian's jaw clench. He spoke calmly. There will be no statement that blames her. Several board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. One cleared his throat. Julian, public opinion is volatile, and shareholders need reassurance, not ambiguity. We need closure. Julian folded his hands. Then let us give them truth. Mark scoffed. Truth does not control markets. Narrative does. Julian turned slowly to face him. Then, we change the narrative. Mark's smile thinned. You protect her, and you will sink this company. Julian's eyes sharpened. If the company cannot survive the truth, then it deserves to fall. Silence spread thick across the room. Mark recovered quickly, tapping the projector remote. A slide appeared showing the blurred screenshot of Emily performing CPR, twisted to appear intimate. Investors see this, he said coldly. They see a liability. They see a scandal that can be weaponized against us. And they expect leadership, not sentiment. Julian stood. Play the full footage. Mark stiffened. That is unnecessary. Julian's voice cut like a blade. Play it. A board member hesitated, then nodded to IT. The lights dimmed and the screen switched to security footage from the diner. The room watched as Julian collapsed, clutching his chest, watched. Rich men in suits recoil, watched panic choke the air. Then, Emily rushed forward, dropping to her knees, checking his pulse, her hands steady despite shaking breath. The room went silent, except for her voice counting compressions. Mark shifted uncomfortably as other board members leaned forward, eyes widening. Emily administered rescue breaths performed without hesitation or opportunism, Then came the part that made Julian's entire body coil with anger, security yanking her away, while she screamed, "He's not breathing, let me help." Julian watched the board members' expressions shift. Doubt, shame, realization. When the video ended, Julian spoke quietly. "That woman saved my life, and our organization destroyed hers." Mark stood abruptly. "This is emotional manipulation." She put herself in a compromising position. "The footage can be interpreted many ways." Julian faced the board, and the only interpretation we allowed the public to see was a lie. He paused, letting the words settle. "Emily Carter did nothing wrong. Yet because of decisions made in this building she lost her job, she is facing eviction, her son was targeted by CPS, and she is being harassed daily. That is on us, on me. But it ends now." Mark slammed his palm on the table. "You cannot make this public. Your history with the company, your future as CEO, your entire reputation will collapse." Julian stepped toward the center of the room, the projection lighting the determination in his eyes. "I am not protecting my reputation. I am protecting the truth." A murmur rippled through the board. One member cleared her throat anxiously. "The PR team is waiting for your directive." Julian nodded. "Then send out a notice. We're holding a press conference in 2 hours." Mark went pale. "You are out of your mind." Julian replied evenly, "Maybe, but at least I'm not empty." Meanwhile, across the city, Emily sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through endless waves of online hatred. She didn't know her name could become poison in strangers' mouths so quickly. Every comment felt like a stone hurled into her living room. Her eviction deadline loomed. Her job applications were rejected instantly. Noah, sensing her distress, sat quietly, coloring beside her, occasionally glancing up with worried eyes. "Mommy, are we going to be okay?" he whispered. Emily forced a fragile smile. "We will be, somehow." But the truth was she had no idea how. A breaking news alert flashed across her phone. "Whitmore Holdings announces emergency press conference." Emily frowned. Her heart hammered. "No, no, no," she whispered. If Julian said anything about her publicly, it would explode again. She grabbed the remote, turning on the television. Every channel replayed the freeze frame with new speculation. She sank onto the couch, dread coiling in her stomach. Meanwhile, inside the press hall, Julian stepped up to the podium before a swarm of flashing cameras, reporters shouting his name aggressively. Lauren stood behind him, tense alert. Julian adjusted the microphone. His expression calm, but fire simmered beneath the surface. "Thank you for coming. I will make a statement. No questions after." Reporters quieted, sensing the gravity in his tone. Julian began last week. I collapsed from cardiac arrest at a local diner. I would not be standing here today if not for one person. A woman named Emily Carter, a single mother, a waitress, a person who acted with courage when those around her hesitated. Emily, who was watching at home, felt her breath freeze. Julian continued. "She performed CPR when I had no pulse. She saved my life." A ripple moved through the room. Reporters glanced at each other, stunned. Julian's voice strengthened. "The narrative circulating online is false. The freeze frame being spread is a distortion. The truth is documented in full security footage, which we are releasing publicly right now." Lauren pressed a button, and the footage played across every screen behind him, raw, real, unedited. Emily watched herself on the TV, tears filling her eyes as the truth she had begged the world to see finally surfaced. Reporters murmured loudly, reactions shifting from scandal, hunger to disbelief to shame. Julian continued. "Someone attempted to destroy her reputation to protect mine. Someone weaponized her economic vulnerability to redirect public scrutiny. That ends today." He turned fully toward the cameras. "Emily Carter is not a villain. She is a hero. And she deserves our protection, not our punishment." Emily clapped a hand over her mouth, sobs rising uncontrollably. Noah crawled into her lap, hugging her tight. "Mommy, the man on TV is talking about you," she whispered. "I know, baby, I know." Julian continued, speaking with a steadiness that came from conviction. "Effective immediately, Whitmore Holdings is funding legal support for anyone wrongfully targeted in this incident, including Miss Carter. Additionally, we are launching a nationwide initiative to protect frontline workers from reputational harm and economic retaliation. I will not allow my silence to be the reason an innocent woman suffers." Mark, who watched from the back of the hall, stepped forward, shouting, "You are destroying your future." Julian's gaze cut through him. "My future is meaningless if built on someone else's ruin." The cameras swung toward Mark, capturing every twitch of his face. Reporters smelled blood. Questions erupted about internal corruption, about leaked information, about fabricated misconduct claims. Mark realized too late that the narrative had turned. Permanently. Lauren signaled security, who calmly escorted him out, as he yelled, "This is not over." But it was. Emily watched as the camera zoomed in on Julian's steady expression, and something inside her cracked open, trembling with gratitude and fear, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. When the broadcast ended, she turned off the TV, her hands shaking wildly. She whispered into the quiet room, "He did it." Noah tugged her sleeve. "Mommy, does this mean the bad people stop now?" Emily hugged him tightly, burying her face in his hair. "I hope so, Angel. I hope so." But as she held him, she felt something shift inside her, a quiet certainty that her world had begun to change again, not through scandal, not through suffering, but because someone with unimaginable power had finally chosen truth over fear, chosen her humanity over his own empire. 1 year later, Boston did not feel like the same city, and in many ways neither did Emily. Snow fell outside her apartment window, drifting slowly like soft white feathers, instead of the sharp biting flakes she remembered from that night in the diner. The world still rushed outside, but inside her home there was warmth, real warmth, earned warmth, not gifted by luck or pity. She stood at the kitchen counter, pouring cocoa into 2 mugs, while Noah sat at the table, building a Lego rocket ship, the kind he used to only dream about when money was tight. "Mommy, I put the boosters on wrong again," he said, frowning. Emily smiled and leaned down, gently rotating the pieces. "You just had it backwards, sweetheart. That is all not wrong, just learning." Noah grinned, satisfied, and returned to his project, humming quietly. Their life looked normal, simple, peaceful, but nothing about the past year had been easy or magical. It had been built one exhausting step at a time. After the press conference, the storm did not vanish. There were still reporters who wanted her pain packaged as entertainment, still strangers online who preferred scandal over truth, still whispers in grocery stores from people who hadn't seen the video, or didn't care. But Emily learned how to stand something she had not realized she'd forgotten how to do. She met with lawyers, she met with social workers, she fought CPS, until they closed the case with a formal apology. She framed the letter for Noah, so he would always know the truth. She completed her CPR instructor certification, the same training she had used on Julian, and began teaching classes twice a week at the community center. At first, only a handful of people attended, then dozens, then waiting lists formed, and people said, "I saw that video, thank you for showing the world it matters." Meanwhile, Julian rebuilt his company from the inside out, not with flashy speeches but with uncomfortable work. He fired executives who retaliated against employees, developed protections for hourly workers, created a fund for families facing wrongful termination. People called it the Carter Initiative, a name Julian insisted on despite Emily's protests. And yet, despite their lives crossing in boardrooms, hearings, and community events, Emily did not become part of Julian's world. Not at first. She politely turned down his offers to send a driver, take her to dinner, secure a new apartment, handle her bills. She was grateful, but she was determined. She wanted her life to be hers, not something rescued or purchased. Julian understood. He gave space. He watched from a distance, even when every instinct in him wanted to be near her. Attraction did not disappear, but it learned patience. Tonight was their first quiet evening together in months, not because they had avoided each other, but because they had been living deliberately, cautiously, choosing not to collapse into each other out of trauma. A soft knock sounded on her door. Emily wiped her hands on a towel, steadying her breath. Even after a year, Julian's presence still pulled something deep inside her. She opened the door. Julian stood on the threshold, holding a small wrapped box dusted with snowflakes in his hair and coat. "You are early," she said softly, unable to stop the small smile pulling at her lips. "Traffic was lighter than usual," he replied, then looked at Noah. "Hey, rocket engineer, how is the NASA project?" Noah held up the half-built ship proudly. "I am almost done. Miss Emily says I need to measure twice and snap once." Julian laughed, a warm, low sound. "Sounds like excellent engineering philosophy." Emily stepped back. "Come in, Julian." He entered, and warmth enveloped him, not just from the heater but from the home itself, the feeling of being welcome without condition. Something he realized he had never truly experienced in his own penthouse. She motioned to the cocoa mugs. "Want one?" "Only if yours is the one with extra cinnamon," he teased. She rolled her eyes, but her smile deepened. They moved into the living room, Noah engrossed in his build, leaving Emily and Julian at the counter. She nodded toward the small box. "Is that for Noah?" "No," Julian said suddenly, looking oddly nervous. "It is for you." Emily blinked, took the box, hesitated, then unwrapped it carefully. Inside lay a simple silver necklace, a tiny engraved charm in the shape of a heartbeat line. She inhaled, a soft tremor passing through her. Julian spoke quietly. "It is not jewelry for romance, not yet anyway," he added with a gentle honesty that warmed her cheeks. "It is a reminder. You kept my heart beating when I could not. You taught me to rethink what leadership means, what humanity means. You changed everything because you chose to do what was right, even when it cost you everything." Emily closed her fingers around the necklace. Her voice wavered. "Doing the right thing shouldn't cost everything." He held her gaze. "It should not. And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure fewer people pay that price." She looked down, smoothing the chain against her skin. "Julian, I am not ready for anything big, not yet." "I know," he said softly. "That is not what I am asking for. I just want to walk beside you, even if the pace is slow, even if the steps are small." Emily's throat tightened. After everything that had happened, trust was not impossible but delicate. Yet here was Julian offering not rescue, not control, not promises he could not keep, but presence. Genuine, steady presence. She nodded. "I would like that. More than you know." Julian exhaled the tension, leaving his shoulders. "Good then, let us start there." Noah looked up suddenly. "Mommy, can Julian help me attach the wing? It is too hard." Emily smiled. "Go on." Julian knelt beside Noah, guiding his hands gently, showing him where the pieces locked into place. As she watched them both, something grounded settled inside her. Not a fairy tale, not a rescue, just a beginning. Later, after they finished the rocket, after Noah fell asleep on the couch clutching his creation, Emily and Julian stood by the window watching snow drift under the streetlights. Julian spoke softly. "I used to think change came from power, from status, from the top down. Turns out it comes from the people who kneel on diner floors to save strangers." Emily looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "It comes from choosing to see people for who they are, not what they can offer." Julian turned to her, eyes warm, steady. "Then let me see you, Emily. Let me keep seeing you." She swallowed, then nodded. "One day at a time. One truth at a time. One choice at a time." Outside, the city breathed cold and bright. Inside the apartment, two people stood closer than they ever had, yet still giving each other space enough to grow. Emily whispered the words that had carried her through the darkest nights. "Doing the right thing should not cost everything." Julian answered, "And now it won't. Not anymore. If you made it all the way to this moment, then you already know this was never just a story about a billionaire or a single mom or a scandal caught on camera. It was about the cost of doing what is right in a world that sometimes punishes honesty more harshly than wrongdoing." And if Emily's journey or Julian's transformation stirred something in you even for a second, then don't let the feeling fade. Stories like this are not just entertainment, they are reminders. A reminder that one choice can change a life. A reminder that ordinary people can carry extraordinary courage. A reminder that compassion is not weakness, but the first step toward justice. So before you scroll away or jump into your next video, take a breath with me and ask yourself something simple but powerful. If you were in that diner, if someone collapsed in front of you, would you hesitate, or would you step forward the way Emily did, even knowing the world might twist it against you? Think about that for a moment, because these choices shape the world we all share. And now, I want to hear from you truly. Wherever you are watching from, whatever time it is, tell me this in the comments. What do you believe is the real cost of doing the right thing? Have you ever stepped into a situation where you helped someone even when it scared you? Did anyone ever misunderstand your intention or judge you for trying? Have you ever been an Emily or known someone who was? And if you could say one sentence to someone who feels small, invisible, or pushed aside by a system too big to fight, what would you tell them? Your words matter more than you think, because someone reading the comments might need your message more than they will ever admit. And before you go, don't forget to tell us where you are watching from. Whether you're in a small town in Ohio, a high-rise in New York, a warm porch in Texas, a snowy street in Colorado, or anywhere else in the world, your voice becomes part of this community we are building together, one story at a time. If you want more stories like this, more tales of courage and kindness and love that rises up from impossible places, make sure you hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay close, because the next story is already on its way. And trust me, you do not want to miss what comes next. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for letting this story into your heart. And remember, whatever the world says, whatever obstacles you face, doing the right thing should never cost you everything. Now tell me where you are watching from, and what part of Emily's journey stayed with you the longest. Your turn.